The Young and the Restless spoilers. The silence around Genoa City had grown thick in the past few days, like a fog that refused to lift. News about Mariah's confession spread quietly, whispered through corridors of Newman Media, down the polished halls of Jabot, and into the walls of the apartment she once shared with Tessa. What began as a vague rumor about a breakdown was now an unbearable truth. Mariah had confessed to murder. She claimed that during her business trip to Cassidy First, a project meant to expand a series of marketing partnerships, something had gone terribly wrong. Those who knew her could hardly believe it. Mariah, who had fought so hard to build a stable life after years of pain and uncertainty, now stood accused of a crime that seemed to come from another, darker world. But beneath that quiet exterior, behind every carefully chosen word, lived a woman haunted by ghosts she could no longer silence. Months earlier, that trip to Cassidy First had seemed harmless. It was supposed to be routine, a short flight, a few meetings, a week away from the chaos of Genoa City. But the hotel she checked into became something else entirely. She described it later as too quiet, too dim, the kind of place that made every shadow feel like it was watching. On the second night, she met him, a man older than her father, well-dressed but unsettling in the way he spoke her name before she introduced herself. No one knew what drew her into his orbit, whether it was politeness, fear, or some invisible thread of trauma from the past. But when she looked into his eyes, something inside her shifted. She saw not the stranger before her but the face of Ian, the man who had once manipulated her, kidnapped her, broken her trust in the world. It didn't matter that the man in front of her wasn't Ian, her mind had already made the connection. And in that moment, the past came rushing back like a scream in an empty room. The next hours were a blur of panic and confusion. There were fragments of memory, hands trembling, the sound of a glass hitting the floor, the muffled cries of someone gasping for air. Mariah later described it in broken sentences. She was sitting on the bed, the man said something cruel, something that triggered a storm of terror, and then she saw her own hands holding a pillow. She pressed it against his face as if silencing the voice that had haunted her for years. She didn't know how long it lasted, she only knew that when she stood up, everything was still. The man was motionless. Her breathing was ragged. The room smelled of sweat and fear. She dropped the pillow and stared at her hands, as if waiting for someone to explain what she had done. Then she left, no screams, no calls for help, just the sound of her footsteps fading into the corridor. Weeks later, she appeared at a small clinic in Boston. She told no one where she was going. The clinic specialized in trauma recovery, a place for those who couldn't face the world without breaking. She spoke little, ate little, and when she did speak, her words carried the weight of guilt she could no longer contain. The doctors noted her sleeplessness, her fear of closed spaces, and her tendency to wake up screaming in the middle of the night. But she refused to talk about the man at the hotel. Instead, she said she was repairing herself. Tessa called her every day, leaving messages that went unanswered. Friends asked questions, but Mariah's silence became her wall. She told the clinic she needed to be rebuilt before she could go home. What she didn't say was that she was terrified of what home even meant now. When Tessa finally received the confession, it was not through a phone call but through a carefully written letter that arrived late one night. The handwriting was steady, but the words trembled with shame. Mariah confessed that she had killed a man, though she wasn't sure if he truly died. She described the scene as though it had happened to someone else, a detached, dreamlike recollection filled with gaps. She said she couldn't live with the memory anymore, and she needed to face it before it consumed her. The final line said simply, "Don't follow me, Tess. I need to do this alone." But Tessa, who had walked through every storm beside her, couldn't let that be the end. She knew that behind Mariah's guilt there was something more, something unspoken. And so she packed her bag and left for Cassidy First. The hotel was still there, unchanged, standing cold and immaculate as though it had never housed a single dark act. Tessa walked through the lobby, her footsteps echoing across marble floors, her mind replaying the few details she knew. The manager barely remembered Mariah, describing her as polite but distracted, checking in late, leaving without notice. No one reported a disturbance that night. No body was found. The police never came. It was as if the man had vanished or perhaps had never existed at all. Still, Tessa felt a chill crawl down her spine when she entered the room number Mariah had written in her confession. The air was thick, stale, heavy with the kind of silence that feels intentional. She closed the door behind her and stood still, trying to feel what Mariah had felt. The bed was the same style as in her letter's description. The curtains were drawn tight, and for a moment Tessa could almost see her, Mariah sitting on the edge of the bed, hands trembling, the pillow beside her like a weapon born out of desperation. Tessa's search became obsessive. She questioned staff, scoured digital records, checked missing person reports. The more she searched, the less sense it made. No guests matching the man's description had checked in under his name. The room showed no signs of struggle. It was as though Mariah had imagined the whole thing, or worse, someone had covered it up. Her mind turned to the possibility of blackmail, manipulation, or something larger than either of them could see. Maybe the man wasn't random. Maybe he was part of something that reached back to Ian, to the cult, to the fragments of trauma that still lived in Mariah's veins like poison. That night, Tessa sat in the dark room, staring at the bed, and whispered to herself that love meant finding the truth, even if it destroyed them both. Back in Genoa City, whispers began to spread. Devon heard about Mariah's disappearance and tried to reach out to Tessa, but she ignored every call. Sharon, Mariah's mother, felt the old dread return, the same dread she once felt when her daughter vanished before giving birth to Dominic. She feared this was the same story repeating itself, another nightmare born from unhealed wounds. But Sharon knew her daughter. Mariah wouldn't fabricate a story like this for attention. She was too grounded, too scarred to lie about something so dark. Still, the lack of evidence created tension between those who wanted to believe her and those who feared she might be unraveling. Tessa, meanwhile, refused to stop digging. She found surveillance footage, grainy, incomplete, but enough to show that Mariah had indeed been with an older man at the bar the night she arrived. The man's face was partially obscured, his gestures calm, almost calculated. A few hours later, the camera showed him entering the elevator with her. He never appeared again. That was the proof Tessa needed. Mariah hadn't been imagining things. Something had happened in that room, and now it was up to Tessa to uncover what. But when she brought the footage to the local police, they seemed hesitant, almost dismissive. The report from that night had already been filed as no incident. Someone had erased the truth. Tessa stayed in Cassidy First for days, retracing Mariah's steps, reliving her trauma secondhand. Each night she woke from nightmares, seeing flashes of a pillow, a struggle, a shadowed man gasping for air. The guilt that had once belonged solely to Mariah began to infect her too. She wondered whether she truly wanted the truth, or if part of her needed to believe Mariah was innocent to survive it all. Because if Mariah really had killed a man, then their love would always be stained by that night. And if she hadn't, then someone had orchestrated the perfect lie to destroy them. As the days went on, more strange details surfaced. A missing guest record appeared under a false name. Payments were made in cash. The man's luggage vanished before the staff noticed his absence. It was too precise, too deliberate. Tessa began to suspect the man wasn't random at all but had been watching Mariah long before that trip. Perhaps he was connected to Ian, or to someone else seeking revenge for the past. That would explain Mariah's panic, her belief that she was confronting a ghost. But it didn't explain why no one else remembered him. Eventually, Tessa returned to Boston to confront Mariah at the clinic. What she found was not the woman she once knew but a hollow version of her. Thin, quiet, and lost behind glassy eyes. Mariah didn't speak much, her words came out like fragments of confession. She said she saw him everywhere, even now, even in the reflections of her hospital window. She didn't know if he was real anymore. Tessa sat beside her, torn between compassion and terror, realizing that whatever truth she uncovered might never free them from this nightmare. The investigation into the murder, or the illusion of one, would soon consume Genoa City. The Newmans, the Chancellors, even the Abbotts would find themselves entangled as connections surfaced between business contracts, false identities, and old cult members returning under new names. For now, though, the story belonged to two women bound by love and haunted by one impossible question: did Mariah kill a man, or did the ghost of her past finally find a way to destroy her from within? The answer would not come easily. In the world of the young and the restless, truth is never clean, it bleeds through lies, it hides in silence, and it changes shape every time someone dares to look closer. Daniel's arrival in Cassidy First was quiet but deliberate, the kind of entrance made by someone who already understood that what he was walking into wasn't just another mystery, it was a descent into something far more personal. He had heard enough about Mariah's confession to feel the weight of it pressing against his conscience, and yet his reason for coming wasn't just curiosity. It was Tessa. She had called him once, briefly, in the middle of the night, her voice barely audible, trembling under the strain of exhaustion and fear. She said she needed someone she could trust, someone who wouldn't judge Mariah but who could help her stay grounded as she searched for answers. Daniel didn't hesitate. Maybe it was loyalty, maybe something deeper, but he packed his bag and boarded the next flight without asking what he was truly stepping into. From the moment he saw Tessa standing outside that old hotel, he knew this wouldn't be easy. She looked pale, fragile, her strength replaced by a haunted determination. The air between them was filled with unspoken memories, times they had leaned on each other, moments when friendship had almost tipped into something more. But now wasn't the time for that. Or at least, that's what Daniel told himself as they checked into the hotel together. The clerk handed them a single key. The system was full, he said. Only one room left. They both hesitated but accepted without argument. What mattered was being close to the truth. Still, as they walked down the corridor toward that room, both could feel the faint pulse of tension building beneath their skin, the unspoken knowledge that proximity could blur the fragile lines between grief and temptation. Inside, the room was small and cold. There was only one bed, neatly made, and a single lamp that flickered with the hum of faulty wiring. The air smelled of old dust and disinfectant, a faint echo of everything that had happened there months before. Tessa placed her bag near the dresser and stared at the bed for a long time. That was where Mariah had sat. That was where the man had died, or maybe hadn't. Daniel could sense her spiraling thoughts and placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, telling her without words that she wasn't alone. But in doing so, he felt something stir in him that went beyond friendship. He'd spent years trying to make sense of his own failures, his marriage, his choices, his tendency to run when things grew difficult. Now, standing beside a woman whose life was collapsing in front of him, he felt both protective and conflicted. Tessa wasn't just someone to help, she was someone who reminded him of who he used to be before life grew so complicated. Their investigation began with methodical precision. Daniel handled the logistics, records, security footage, contacts, while Tessa revisited every detail Mariah had shared. Together they pieced together a timeline that seemed increasingly impossible. The man's name didn't exist in any registry. His credit card had no traceable link. Even the hotel's maintenance logs from that week were wiped clean. Daniel began to suspect that they were chasing a ghost, but Tessa refused to accept that. Her love for Mariah fueled her persistence. She needed to believe there was something concrete to hold on to, even if it meant tearing herself apart to find it. Daniel admired her tenacity but feared it too. She was unraveling, and he could feel himself slipping alongside her, drawn deeper into the mystery and into her orbit. At night, the silence became unbearable. They would sit on opposite sides of the bed, each lost in their own thoughts, pretending not to notice how their proximity made the air heavier. Sometimes, when the wind rattled the window or the light flickered, Tessa would flinch and Daniel would instinctively move closer. They never spoke of it, but the tension between them grew like a living thing. It wasn't just attraction, it was the intimacy of shared fear, the kind of closeness born from danger and despair. As the nights passed, Daniel began to question his motives. Was he here to help Tessa find the truth, or was he using her pain to fill his own emptiness? The guilt gnawed at him, but the pull was undeniable. Their search took a darker turn when Daniel uncovered something disturbing, a receipt from a local pharmacy dated the day after Mariah left town. It was for sedatives and bandages, purchased under an alias that resembled her handwriting. It suggested that Mariah had either been injured or tending to someone who was. This clue reignited Tessa's hope but also deepened the mystery. If Mariah had tried to help the man afterward, it could mean he was still alive, or that she was trying to cover her tracks. Daniel urged caution, warning Tessa that digging too deep might attract attention from people who didn't want the truth found. But she refused to stop. That night, she convinced him to return to the scene one last time, to look for anything the police might have missed. Against his better judgment, Daniel agreed. They went back to the room after midnight. The hallway was deserted, the air thick with anticipation. Tessa moved carefully, scanning the corners, touching the furniture as though she could feel the residue of that night. Daniel followed her, flashlight in hand, his pulse quickening with every sound. Then, behind the dresser, he noticed something wedged against the wall, a piece of torn fabric, dark and brittle, with what looked like dried blood at the edge. It wasn't much, but it was enough to change everything. If the man had bled, there should have been a report. But there wasn't. Daniel placed the fabric in a plastic bag, and as he did, he noticed a faint clicking sound outside the door. Someone was walking down the hall. They froze. The footsteps paused near their room, then slowly moved on. When the silence returned, Tessa exhaled, realizing how close they might have been to being caught. Whoever it was, they were not alone in searching this place. Back in their room, Daniel urged Tessa to leave Cassidy first before it was too late. But she couldn't. Her mind was too entangled in the web Mariah had woven. She needed closure, needed to know whether her wife was a murderer or a victim. The next day, they visited the local morgue under false pretenses, hoping to find records of unidentified bodies from that period. They found none matching the description. It should have been good news, but instead it left them in limbo, caught between relief and fear. If the man wasn't dead, where was he now? Had he disappeared willingly, or had someone helped him vanish? As they delved deeper, they began asking the wrong questions to the wrong people. Daniel's inquiries about security tapes drew suspicion, and Tessa's persistence with the hotel staff made her an easy target. They didn't notice the black car parked across the street from their hotel, or the way the same woman appeared twice in different cafes they visited. Someone was watching them. One evening, as Daniel returned from a meeting with a local contact, he found the room door ajar. Inside, the bed had been turned over, their belongings scattered, and the torn fabric was gone. Whoever had been there knew exactly what they were looking for. Panic set in. They had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. That night, Tessa sat by the window, staring out at the city lights, her mind racing. Daniel sat behind her, torn between protecting her and confronting the truth. He told himself he was here to make sure she didn't self-destruct, to keep her from falling too far into the madness Mariah had left behind. But in truth, he was falling too. Every time she turned toward him, every time her eyes met his with that raw, broken vulnerability, he felt something break inside him. They were two lost souls chasing ghosts, and in the quiet of that small hotel room, the distance between them began to fade. When she finally lay down to rest, there was no need for words. The single bed that had once symbolized tension now felt like refuge. Two people, bound by fear and confusion, found a brief moment of comfort in each other's presence. It wasn't about betrayal or desire, it was about survival, about finding warmth in the middle of so much cold uncertainty. Morning came harsh and gray. Tessa awoke with guilt pressing against her chest, realizing how dangerously close they had come to crossing emotional lines. Daniel was already awake, staring at the floor, lost in thought. Whatever had passed between them in the night was unspoken but understood. They couldn't afford distractions, not now. The truth about Mariah still lingered like smoke, and until they found answers, neither could rest. But the dynamic between them had changed. They moved with an unspoken connection now, each protecting the other more fiercely than before. As their investigation continued, they discovered that the man Mariah had described might have been connected to a defunct company with ties to Ian's old network. That revelation turned everything upside down. If true, Mariah's actions might not have been murder but self-defense. Still, the fact that someone was following them suggested that those connected to the man weren't finished cleaning up the past. Daniel realized they were in real danger. What began as an emotional mission for Tessa was turning into a deadly pursuit, one that could end with both of them buried under the secrets of Cassidy first. By the end of the week, Tessa was no longer sure what she was searching for: justice, forgiveness, or simply proof that love could survive even this. Daniel stayed close, his loyalty unwavering even as his heart ached with feelings he couldn't express. Together they would leave the city, but not before realizing that the story wasn't over.